The concept of upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons is fundamental to a clinical description of effects of motor system lesions, right? Welcome to episode 2 of Project Neuroscience. Our today's discussion will focus on prerequisite concepts to fathom the pathoanatomy and the pathophysiology of upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron lesions, right? So let us start with the blueprint of today's discussion timeline. So we will be discussing about the tracts and the muscle spindle essential concepts, right? Well, we won't be digging at their last point, but we will be extracting our analytical points which will be helpful to us to analyze the lesions and their effects on the motor system. Now let's start with the tracts first. Now friends, before going on to the tracts, we should know certain technical aspects of the tracts, right? So what are tracts? What constitutes the tracts? Basically, they are the bundle of the fibers which are originating from the nerve cell bodies located inside the central nervous system, right? Now, we should also know what is the concept of upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. Before studying their lesions, we should know them correctly. Now, for example, this is the motor cortex and this is the single motor cortex neuron. Now let us say this is the brainstem and this is the section of spinal cord that I have enlarged. Now the fibers are running from single motor cortex cell body and this neuron is sending its fibers, right? So this is cell body and this is the axon, right? These collection of such cell bodies, axons constitutes the tract. It's simple. So let us say this one is ending here in the pons and the second is ending here in the medulla, or third we can say the cerebellum also. Third is ending at the cerebellum and likewise. Now all these fibers which are ending on the respective sides are constituting the upper motor neurons, right? And also not only these, the fibers which are originating from this, for example this nuclei is present in the pons and this is giving rise to a fiber which is synapsing here, this red spot which is at the anterior gray horn cell. It is important, it is the anterior gray horn cell. This is also the upper motor neuron. So we see that if fiber from the single motor cortex is ending onto the pons nuclei and the fiber which is synapsing with the cell body in the pons and this cell body which is synapsing here in the anterior gray horn cell is also the upper motor neuron. Now the fiber which is originating from this anterior gray horn which is supplying to the muscle is actually the lower motor neuron. Rest all are the upper motor neuron, and this is the very basic concept, very basic core of our understanding of the lesions of the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. So collectively we can say all the fibers that impinge upon the lower motor neuron from the supranucleus, supraspinal sides are constituting the upper motor neurons, and finally those neurons collection from the tracts. It's simple. And all the fibers, that is the alpha motor neuron which sends axon to the skeletal muscle, is constituting the lower motor neuron. Now I will be discussing about the tract classification first and then their function. So the tract classification I will be discussing would be very conventional, or it may sound you unconventional which you haven't read before. So just before going on to that, I would like to clear the confusion of the pyramidal and extrapyramidal tracts. So pyramidal tracts involve the corticospinal and the corticonuclear tracts. Corticonuclear tracts are also known as corticobulbar tracts, and the rest extrapyramidal tracts are actually, the function is very accessory to the corticospinal or the corticobulbar tracts. Now extrapyramidal, why they are called? Because here we have the rough section of the medulla or the brainstem. So this is the decussation of the fibers. This is also known as the pyramidal part because these fibers in the longitudinal section forms a structure like pyramid. That's why they are known as pyramidal tracts. And they are anterior. First of all, they are anterior, and all the this is the extrapyramidal, this is extrapyramidal, and this is all the extrapyramidal tracts are posteriorly and usually located in the tegmentum part. So those are known as extrapyramidal tracts. Let us know some important concept about the naming. Now when I say that corticospinal, it means to say that from the cortex to the spinal cord. And likewise, we will be reading about the vestibulospinal, reticulospinal, rubrospinal. So what do they mean? That rubrospinal, what it means, that rubro means red, so it is from the red nucleus, red to the spinal tract. So likewise, vestibulospinal, from the vestibular apparatus, vestibular nuclei to the spinal cord. So we will be naming the tracts like this, so don't confuse in the naming. It will give you the clue from where it starts and where it ends, right? So let us see, from the story starts from the motor cortex. Now the motor cortex is just divided into the three parts: the primary, the premotor, and the supplementary. So usually the pyramidal tracts arise from the primary and the premotor and the supplementary, plus the somatosensory area also. The fibers, so there are the fibers coming like this, premotor and the somatosensory fibers are constituting the pyramidal tracts. The primary tracts constitute the 30%, the premotor and the supplementary together constitute the 30%, and the other 40% is constituted by the somatosensory area. Now the pyramidal tracts, as I have already told you about this configuration, it divided into the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tracts. Now the basic difference is this: you just remember that corticobulbar is up to here, control, and the rest is corticospinal. So corticobulbar is controlling the head, face, and the neck musculature, and the corticospinal is innervating all the axial and the distal and the other skeletal muscles of your body, which is excluding from this area. So the corticobulbar, how it acts, the corticospinal, how it does it acts, let us have a basic idea of it. For example, there is a neuron, single motor cortex neuron, and it's coming to the brainstem nuclei. That is, any cranial nerve nuclei might be there, cranial nerve nuclei. This is the cranial nerve nuclei, and this fiber from here to here it is coming. So this is constituting the corticobulbar area, as there is a proper projection of the muscles on the motor cortex, that is known as homunculus. So according to the projection, the fibers will come from that particular neuron to this nuclei, and this nuclei will give rise to the alpha motor neuron, and it will innervate the respective muscle. The corticospinal, likewise, this is the spinal cord section. So single motor cortex neuron will arise from here. From the pyramidal tract it will go to anterior gray horn, which is constituting the upper motor neuron, right? So directly terminate on the anterior gray horn cell or the intermediate neurons. So this will, from the alpha motor neuron, the anterior gray horn neuron will innervate the muscle, respective muscle. So this is the basic perspective of the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tract. Now there are the other tract and the non-pyramidal part of tract also. Now these are the tracts which play part in the concept building of the clinical manifestation of UMN and LMN lesions. So these other tracts usually give fibers to the brainstem, to the basal ganglia, specifically the putamen and the caudate nucleus, and the vestibular apparatus, the reticular apparatus. So from the motor cortex neuron, the signals are coming to the brainstem also, to the nuclei present in brainstem, right, and the basal ganglia also. So likewise, these tracts are innervating all these structures except besides the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tracts. These tracts are also present, which are very important to know to understand their lesions better. Now, these non-pyramidal part of tracts are important because they send inhibitory signals to the vestibular and the reticular nuclei so that their tone is maintained and the equilibrium of the posture is maintained. We'll study this about in their functional part. So this extrapyramidal tracts arise from the area from the brainstem only, right? So in the brainstem there are certain nuclei which give rise to these fibers, as we have already discussed about the concept of tracts. First is rubrospinal tract, second is reticular nuclei, right? So reticular nuclei have the pontine and the medullary nuclei in the brainstem, which are subparts of the reticular nuclei itself, and the fibers arising from the pontine and the medullary would be termed as pontine reticulospinal tract, and secondly medullary reticulospinal tract. And the third is vestibulospinal tract. So it is classified into further two, lateral and the medial. Now second is bulbospinal tract pathway. So bulbospinal tract, what does it mean? Bulbo means a medullary area in the brainstem. So take it as the brainstem and the spinal. So from the brainstem to the spinal tracts, right? So this is not a very conventional classification, but we are studying here for the clinical aspects. So bulbospinal tracts are classified into three. Again, they will be mixed. So these are the classification which we are making to make our comprehension better. So you can find the tracts which are common in all three classification, but this will certainly help us in our next video. So it is rubrospinal tracts, we already learned, reticulospinal tract, and the third is vestibulospinal tract, right? So after studying them, we will be studying about their functions. So lastly, the spinal cord pathways. We all know that the descending motor pathways are classified into the lateral and medial pathways. This is also not very common, but this is very important to understand. So lateral and medial, the lateral descending motor pathway in the spinal cord are the lateral corticospinal tract, few rubrospinal tract, and the function is the proximal and distal muscle voluntary movement, right? And the medial pathway, the anterior corticospinal tract, the vestibulospinal tract, and the reticulospinal tract, and their function is of axial muscles contraction, movement, and thirdly the balance and the posture.